So I had this idea for after seeing that article. So I wanted to add or elaborate a little bit more to my post, specifically addressing the basically this was talking about in this quote that the poetry of this poem depends on the taxonomy of landscapes, flora and fauna, and of emotions, an ecosystem in which man's activities and feelings are a part. To describe the exterior landscape is also to inscribe the interior landscape. What the man has, he is. The landscape of which he owns and which he lives represents him. It is in his property in more senses than one. So after seeing this article, I wanted to do a comparison. So there has been this ongoing race, and I'm using a comparison of two different studies for trying to be able to mass produce spider silk. Spider silk is really very strong material, and there's a couple different approaches. In this one, it is a study that was done in China. It is a collaboration of a few different universities. You can see like a few departments such as biological science, textile science, laboratory of silkworm genome biology. Basically, they wanted to genetically engineer silkworms to be able to produce spider silk, because spiders cannot be kept in the same way. Unfortunately, when a lot of spiders are kept together, they become cannibalistic. So there is a comparison between that and another place. So this is actually on the West Coast, which is closer to my location, but this one's in San Francisco, California. I initially looked for a study in UC Berkeley, and this is what I found, but although the author went to UC Berkeley, he actually decided to make his own corporation, which is very American. And he was sponsored by the U.S. Army Research Office. This is the closest thing to a study I've been able to find, because his stuff is patented, so he doesn't want to completely show off how he makes his stuff. What kind of makes his way unique is the fact, unlike the other study, he uses, let's see where it shows that. Microsilk. So that's what it is. So this is actually made through brewing yeast. So let's talk about the two approaches. So back to this study. This is conducted in China. It is fitting in this context that they would use silkworms, because silk has been a part of the Chinese culture for 5,000 years, according to Wikipedia. And then here it kind of makes sense that he used he used yeast, which actually doesn't make sense. But if you've ever been to the Pacific Northwest, there is a lot of breweries, so in that way it does make sense. One of the things, so I kind of went all out today and had looked at all the references. Not all of them. There's 87. So I looked at 30 references, 29 maybe. All the ones with links. The references are between the span of about 25 years in this one. This is a fairly recent study, so it makes sense. For the other one, the references are a little bit older, because this one's a bit of an older study. It's from 2013, I think, or, the 2010s. So you got some of these back, like I think the oldest one is from like the 80s, but you see a lot of like 1990s in here. So I don't know, I just kind of like wondered what the implications of where the ideas come from that they're looking for. I was curious about the locations too. So I actually made on Google Maps. So this is, I looked up the universities of a lot of the sources that were cited, to kind of like see like, okay, so here's this university, they're trying to do this study, and they have this question of like how they want to basically how they want to approach the problem. They're wanting to know about silk fibers and the mechanical properties and dragline silks, and basically a lot of the structural characteristics. Locationally, a lot of the studies were also other studies that were conducted in mostly China, South Korea, and Japan. For some reason, there was also studies from Germany, as well as a lot of the East Coast. Yeah. And when I made the other type, for the other study that used yeast, it was kind of like interesting because there was actually a lot less places. I noticed with the studies that were conducted, there was a lot more. So with the Chinese universities, there's a lot more studies that were university students. They were in a team. They could have been from multiple different locations, multiple different universities, kind of like teaming up. But I noticed with the sources that this guy used, there's a lot of studies where it was only maybe like one person or maybe a few people, but from the same institution. I also noticed there was a lot more corporations. There was like Gentech, and like Glycophi, Cozen Biosciences, Nexia Biotechnologies. So there was a lot more pharmaceutical research and development. Oh yeah, that's still Gentech. But anyway, it didn't rely quite as much of like student studies as with the other one. And also, it had a lot of studies from the U.S. military, which kind of makes sense because that's one of the people who were funding the studies. And there was a lot less locations worldwide. I noticed it seems to mostly be in the U.S. and Germany. Not so much in Asia. Also, due to the location, so that's the University of Berkeley right there, where this guy's originally from. There's a lot more studies that originated from the West Coast, or at least a few more. Actually, there's a lot more. A lot of them are just in one area, I think. Where did they go? Anyway. So, that's kind of interesting. So I guess it's just like interesting to kind of see scientific studies as like telling a story. I don't know if I already said this in the beginning because I did this twice. This is my second take. But basically the summary is kind of like the narrative of what you know so far and where you're framing the question, what you basically what people already know. So it's kind of like when you start a story and it talks about the family, it talks about the world you're in, it talks about kind of like just what you're immersed in. And then you go along and it goes through the methods, and to me that's like the adventure of the story. You're kind of like, here's the stuff that they tried, here's what happened. There was this one study I had read a while ago that was actually about jumping spiders, and they had like little platforms where the jumping spiders would jump to, and there was water between the platforms, so which would discourage the spiders to get off the platforms. But it basically was kind of studying the routes, and to me, the way I read it at the time, it kind of like seemed like an adventure story. You have this setup, you're waiting for these spiders to make decisions. These spiders are like placed in this situation. I'm not even entirely sure how, like with this, the spider silk thing has a very definitive, all right, we need this to advance technology and medicine and for production. With the jumping spiders, I'm not entirely sure, besides just understanding their psychology, like what the end goal is. But it's still very interesting that someone thought of that. And you come to the conclusion of the study. And so it's kind of like you go off on this adventure with the things that you know, and you get to the end, and it's like the moral of the story. Like, okay, the spiders didn't do as I planned them to do. For example, they didn't jump where I wanted them to jump, and I didn't account for their free will. And I don't know, I would just like really encourage people, even when they're reading scientific literature, to not just just like receive the information as like, okay, here's this completely objective reality that is devoid. I don't know, the knowledge was handed down by the gods, because like it was still created by people. Like the people created it, and yes, it gets like figured out and sometimes debunked by other people and scrutinized, and it's the best we've got when it comes to objectivity. But even just like, I guess what I want to, one of the takeaways in this discussion is that there was a context in which the knowledge was set out. Like it wasn't just like, oh, here's this neutral knowledge. It came from a question. It came from the materials they had in hand, the location, the geography, the culture, and just, yeah, like, why would one location decide to find the answer of how to reproduce like spider silk and silkworms, and the other would in, brewers, like yeast brewing. It's and where are the studies originating from? Like, are they choosing studies close to their location? How might, research done one way, like by a corporation, like one of the things that I found kind of interesting in framing, because like both of these kind of have to do with genetic engineering. But here on the West Coast, we have a little bit of a different, like, not everyone is really all that friendly to genetic engineering. So, there wasn't frequently asked questions. One thing, did your materials contain GMOs? So there was multiple research on genetic modification in the citations. There was, genetic engineering, genetic sequencing, solubility of spider webs, like the repetitive proteins, recombinant proteins, self-assembling, like trying to figure out, all this stuff. But what's the funny thing to this answer? It says no, which it clarifies later. The process we use to make our fibers does not, or does utilize genetically modified yeast. After the fermentation is complete, the silk protein is purified from the yeast. So there's no GMO yeast in the final material. But I feel like it's kind of dishonest, where it's like a technicality, but it's only saying that to like, comfort people who are uncomfortable with GMOs, and it isn't honest to the process. Another thing is a lot of the Pacific Northwest is very vegan. So another thing when thinking, what's the narrative of the process, or what's the narrative people want to portray in the process, or it says no spiders were harmed in the making of the microsilk fiber. So I don't know, it just gets you to think, like, what are the values that people are taking to the scientific study, or what are the values that they want to portray to the public? Yeah, I don't know. That's what I've got, I guess.